and FiOS Channel 1962. It will be rebroadcast at a later date. Thank you. I want to first thank my fellow members for taking the time to schedule this special meeting so that we can move forward with the superintendent process on two important fronts. First, we're going to vote tonight on an RFQ, a request for qualifications, to be released for search firm services and consultants in our superintendent search process. And the second item tonight is to review and begin discussions on a draft job description. The committee would then receive additional feedback from the search committee and the public at the November 28th school committee meeting and vote on a job description at the regularly scheduled December 5th school committee meeting for immediate posting. Now, if you'd like to speak this evening but have not yet signed up, please see our staff person, Ms. Lena Parvex, in the hallway. We have a limited amount of time for public comment at this special meeting of the school committee this evening, which will end at promptly 6:55 p.m. So we ask that commenters please be brief and limit the input to the business before the committee so that we can hear from everyone that wants to speak this evening. Other topics can be discussed at the next regularly scheduled school committee meeting, which is going to take place in these chambers at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, November 28th. Again, given that we are on a tight timeline this evening with a hard stop at 7 p.m. in order to allow the search committee to hold its meetings in this chamber, let's dive right in. I'm going to turn things over first now to Ms. Oliver Davila, our co-chair of the search committee, who will review for us the request for qualifications in the superintendent search process. Ms. Oliver Davila.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still recovering from being sick. Thank you to Regina from our last committee meeting. So my voice is not as strong, so I apologize for the coughing and the hacking. So first I wanted to just say that from the last time we met, the website is up to date in terms of having the survey, and we added a question around opportunity achievement gaps, English language learners, and students with SPED. So that is live, and I do encourage all school committee members as well as the public to, if you can't make it to the community listening sessions, to please fill out the survey. It's very, very short, and that way we get input if you can't come to one of the community listening sessions. And I want to thank some of the city people that have been working with the search committee for all of their work behind the scenes and helping us to schedule all of the community listening sessions, and also thank all the partners for agreeing to host the community listening sessions, and for those parents and students who have come out. And then lastly, just thank the steering committee for their time. So the last time we met, we talked about the RFP for the search firm, and the comments that we received back from school committee were around making sure that we included some of the challenges of our district, especially the opportunity achievement gap, English language learners, and students of SPED. So you'll see that those are included in here. And the other piece that has been updated is just the dates of the RFP process. So we plan to get this out ASAP, and then we would have a 2-week turnaround for firms or consultants, and that's also something that we updated. So it's not just the search firms that are able to apply, but any consultancy. And we updated the date, so again, in 2 weeks, the RFP would be due, and then we would have some interviews, and then choose the firm. And then by November 28th, we'll come back to school committee and look at the characteristics job description with an eye towards a final on December 5th, so the search firm can just kick up the search process very fast, so that we make sure we don't miss out on any good candidates. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments on the RFP revisions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Oliver Davila. I'll open it up to members for questions and discussion. Are there any questions or for the on the RFQ? Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver Davila, and I think this is very well done, and I appreciate what you added in, particularly added in about the challenges. Number one, because we should be clear on that we do have challenges, and I like the fact that you added that in. I also like the schedule of key dates. This is aggressive, but it's worthwhile. The one comment I have is around the second to last section, which is section 4, qualifications. And it said the selected firm or consultant must have recent experience in the past 18 months in conducting a successful search. Selection of a candidate and acceptance of a position is facilitated by your firm for a superintendent of schools with a comparably sized urban pre-K school district. If a firm does not have such experience or does not submit information in the proposal regarding this qualification, the proposal may be deemed non-responsive, may be eliminated from further consideration. And my comment is, I think that's just, it may be a bit too restrictive. I want to make sure that we have a variety of firms respond. The folks who actually are doing searches for superintendent of schools, urban districts, 40,000 or above, are actually quite small in number, particularly the ones that have, for that size, that have done it in the past 18 months as an example. It's probably between 3 and 5 would be the number that could say that they were successful at that. And I think there are a number of the firms we may be interested in talking with, or at least getting an answer back from them, that do searches in higher ed, in private, in a variety of other things around education that may be worthwhile to at least get a response from. One, to have the response numbers up higher, and two, get some different viewpoints. We will learn as a search committee by talking with these folks during the interview process. And the other thing is, there are a number of firms in the Boston area that do higher ed, that do nonprofit, et cetera, that maybe haven't done a superintendency recently, but have done it in the past, that are aware of the challenges, that may be interested in at least giving us a response. So if I may suggest, there may be a way to soften this a little bit, because I do think earlier on we say, earlier on in page 4, we say the search committee reserves the right to reject any and all responses in its sole discretion. So we do say that, and we do say in the submission guidelines on page 3, section 2.1, we say, give us a summary of your firm's experience in executive searches for superintendents of comparably sized districts, and then 2, a list of recent assignments in education or related fields. So I think we're already kind of covered in letting it know we want it to be people that are deeply experienced in this field. But I would just respectfully suggest we try to keep the door open a little bit to get, someone may come at us with a tremendous record of recruiting that we like. Some of the complaints in the past that the pools haven't been diverse enough with respect to gender and background, et cetera. So why not, there may be a consultant that we happen to think is good, that is starting to practice and has deep experience. I'm hypothesizing now. But I would just suggest maybe we could change it to the selected firm or consultant. Maybe there's a way we could say a priority would be given in the selection process to a firm that has recent experience, or just take out that last sentence if a firm does not have such experience. I've rambled on enough, but I think fellow members would see the point that I'm getting at here.
Well, on that point, Mr. O'Neill, I wonder, was this a point of any discussion or focus with the search committee?
Yes, it was. The reason that we placed it so strongly is we wanted to make sure, one, that the superintendent would have experience working in an urban setting. That was a big focus. And then the other one was that we wanted to make sure that it was a similar size district, and that we wanted to make sure that the firm, based on previous firms and people's comments, that firm actually had the experience placing someone with that particular experience. But I do agree that we have the other 2 points in there, and I do think it's good to maybe be a little bit looser to see what other, because I do always think that sometimes we think so much in the box that if we were able to get some diversity in the types of, then again, it would be up to the search committee to decide at the end of the day, whoever applies and whatever.
And again, this is about qualifications of the firm we're asking to help us, not in the ultimate superintendent.
Correct.
And so I think that there's room there to have a range of proposals given to us that would be excluded by putting this in. Otherwise, some firms will look at this and say, okay, we haven't done one in the last 18 months. We're not responding. And I think we're missing a chance to get some different perspectives given to us as a search committee by firms.
Ms.
Can I
Robinson,
give,
do you- oh,
could I give an
sorry,
example?
please.
So, a supporting example, so Isaac Miller is one of the greatest search firms in the country. They've placed Howard University's president. They do mission-driven work around the country. They would not qualify, and so they would not go forward. So that'd be an example of a great search firm that we couldn't get, who may be interested in taking on a task like this, because they have enough deep concern about urban.
Yeah. I thank you for that, Dean Coleman, because I would also add that there was some Boston, one of the other things we've been saying is getting people that understand Boston. So we're going to be, Chair Lecanto, myself, you, Ms. Oliver Davila, Co-Chair Motley, we're all gonna be reaching out to candidates to talk to them, and then what are we gonna do? We're gonna funnel them to the search firm. So just as much is going to come from us, but they're the ones that are gonna have to have the initial conversation honestly with these candidates about what's working in Boston, what's not working in Boston, what's it gonna be like, how can you succeed in Boston? And having some firms that have had some experience of placing candidates in Boston, if they've been a college president or a head of nonprofit or so on and so forth, is equally valuable to me as it is, have they placed a superintendent 40,000 above in the last 18 months?
Ms. Robinson, do you have something to add as well?
No, I would agree with what said, and particularly with at the last comment, but only one thing I just wanted to say, on the members, there's a typo that you should look at, is that Dr. Freeman Wisdom is the headmaster of the O'Brien
right.
and not of Boston Latin Academy, that's all.
Thank you.
Her son attends Boston Latin Academy.
Yes,
Right.
son is.
So she's a parent of a Boston
Boston
Latin
Latin
Academy
Academy.
student.
Thank you.
And then
Make
the
that
other
change as
place, and
well.
I'm not,
Right.
and now I'm confused, I
Gotcha.
can't find my other comment, but it said something about recruiting nationally, internationally, but it didn't say locally. And even though nationwide would assume that, I think it's important that, to your point about local in Boston, to say.
That's a good point. Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Dr. Uriarte, do you have anything further to add? Well, thank you. I think Ms. Robinson makes a valid point on recruiting, and I might suggest as well, based on the comments of Ms. Robinson, Dr. Coleman, and Mr. O'Neill, that if we go back to that qualifications section, and I would add myself to this chorus as well, striking that last sentence that begins "if affirm," and adding at the beginning of the paragraph the phrase, "it is preferred that the applicant firm or consultants have recent experience." And so that takes out the requirement that the selected firm or consultant absolutely must have that experience, but we make the statement that it is a preference of this committee, or the search committee, I should say, that recent experience in this type of search could be demonstrated, but it's not an absolute bar, as we've talked about, and that opens the door then to some of these other consultants that we've heard a little bit about tonight and have talked about in previous meetings, to come in and give us a different look, if you will, with respect to diversity, different candidate pools, so on and so forth. Is that a reasonable change that folks are?
So you're suggesting, starting with, it is preferred that the selected firm or consultant have recent experience?
I would take
Strike
out
the
even
word
the
must.
selected. I would take out that section of selected. It is preferred that the applicant firm or consultant have recent experience, if that's acceptable. Selected, I think, is presupposing an outcome.
Right.
And so if we're just stating at the outset that it's preferred that applicants have this, but it's not a disqualifier either.
And then you also suggesting taking out that last sentence, if a firm does not have,
That's correct.
because that's redundant with the previous one.
Correct. Dr.
Is
Uriarte.
that okay, Ms. Oliver?
I'm a little bit confused. We're saying that part of the reason, I think, at least what Mr. O'Neill was, the intention was to open the door to a broader group, but that doesn't mean that the preference of the school committee is for a less experienced company to do it. So I think we need to separate what goes on here, which is a public document that it's meant to attract, from the feeling of the body that we do want somebody that has experience and reach into, people, in a relatively recent time. But I think that's the judgment of the committee, but I think the language I want us to be clear about what the intent of the language is.
Yeah, and the edits that I've made maintains that there's a clear preference for a firm or a consultant that has done this work in relatively recent history with an urban district with comparable characteristics, if you will. But it's not an absolute bar if they don't have that. So we still want to have a look, but
Okay.
our preference would be to select a firm that does have this type of recent experience, absent some other intervening factor.
So the language literally says, it is preferred that.
Yes.
And that's speaking on behalf
Yeah.
of, since it's us issuing it on behalf of the search committee, I think
Yeah,
that
well, we don't want somebody coming back and say, well, you didn't say that it was required or that was preferred, but this way,
that makes it pretty clear.
makes it
Yeah,
pretty
it is
clear.
preferred, yeah.
So in my stage of pushing back on a lot, once we say that, really good firms who may not have this experience won't apply at all. I mean, you're eliminating, you may get some, people in the hunt who are growing, but established firms who may be able to really provide a great service for us would see that and say, well, we're not in the running, we're not even gonna put our name in the hat. If we put language like that, you would eliminate them immediately.
If somebody like Isaacson Miller, if you take out the
No, the-
past 18 months, that would not,
If you say preference will be given to firms that, or we highly prefer firms that have done this type of search, period.
I would then take out in the past 18 months and just say relatively recent experience. So
I'd say
that-
number one, and it's fine with me if we go this way, but a summary of firms experiencing executive service superintendents of schools of comparatively sized pre-K 12 school districts. There are great search firms who've done, as I said, Howard, who wouldn't qualify, so they wouldn't even bother. They may reach out and ask, or we would have to identify them and ask them.
Could we even,
Well, if,
no, I was gonna-
please, Ms. Robinson.
no, I was thinking, how many searches of this type have been done in the last 18 months? So I guess my question would be,
small
would we be saying, would we be eliminating most of the field because
I,
there are
I,
only
I
two
agree
or
with
three?
the 18 months, and that's my point, is that if we overemphasize that a high priority is given to firms that's successful, placing existing superintendents in similar sized districts, they're places we may want to see what they're offering, wouldn't even put their name in the hat.
If I can suggest something that might address this, what this feels like to me to some extent is what you see in a job description, which is basic qualifications and then preferred qualifications, right? So if you think about, okay, you've got 3 to 5 years of experience in a Juris Doctorate degree. The stretch or the preferred qualifications would be someone with a specialty in labor and employment law. Not speaking from experience
Speaking
at
from
all.
personal experience.
Is your resume currently?
When you view it in that regard, we have a basic scope of services that we're asking firms to adhere to in this application, and so those are the baseline expectations. What I would suggest is that in this qualifications section, perhaps we amend it to be titled preferred qualifications, or some other phrase along those lines that, again, gives the signal or reinforces the idea, in addition to what we're talking about with respect to the time limiting factor here of 18 months, the clear indication that we are here to evaluate any applicant that meets the basic scope of services, but of course we would like someone that has this relatively recent experience. That's something that maybe gets us closer to what we're looking for, and I apologize for having my back to you, Ms. Oliver Davila, because you have a clear leading role in all of this.
Just a clarification question. So I hearing a couple different things I want to make sure I understand. So I agree if we take out the 18 months and say it's preferred. The question is, if we are trying to open it to firms, individual consultancies that have a range of experience, then we don't necessarily want to say that they have successfully placed a superintendent, correct? Because then what you're saying, so I just want to be clear, because I'm hearing, if we are saying we want it to be like this breadth of firms that maybe haven't done that, that this maybe just gets worked in terms of, jobs that are comparable, and we can give examples, like a president of a higher education institution, or a president of a hospital, or something like that. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding, or are we saying that we're leaving the superintendent piece in there?
So part of my response is, in the past search, we ended up with a set of possible search firms, all of whom were within the same group. And we picked one, they all had different strengths, but they were all pretty much the same, and, we were choosing what type of Ford we wanted to buy, not, or we looking at a Ford or a Chevy or whatever. And so I'm just putting on the table, do we want to be able to attract a more diverse pool of search firms, which when we see them may speak to us in a different way, versus getting a set of search firms that are all within a group, and then we're picking within that group what we like the better. I mean, it's like house hunting, right? You're gonna, the condo, house, whatever, or just house.
Please, Mr. O'Neill.
I'm thinking back to Ms. Robinson and I, when we first started working together, Dean Robinson, excuse me, when we first started working together, we were interviewing search firms. Do you remember, on the last search committee? And that's really when we first started working together, before you joined the school committee. And it was like, which flavor of vanilla do you want? Because they were 3 firms that all specialized in superintendent of schools for urban districts. And it's a very small group, and quite frankly, a lot of them draw from the same pool of applicants. And that's what we were nervous about. And so I'm intrigued by the way you're going, Ms. Oliver, because yes, a superintendent of schools for a comparably sized urban district, or other jobs with similar complexities of $1 billion budget, 10,000 employees, et cetera, that may open us up to talking to a few different type firms that bring fresh ideas to us. Having said that, the other side of me says that all of these firms have a lot of full-time professionals, and then they have a lot of people that they pull on that tend to be retired from various professions that they pull on for particular searches. And I would be pretty surprised if one of them didn't immediately pull on a school board member or a retired superintendent, right, that knows how to, and puts them on the team. In fact, that's what HYA did the last time. Do you remember that school board member, Dean Robinson? Where was she? She was from somewhere in the South. I'm sorry for being so broad, since I know you're originally from Virginia. I think she was in South Carolina, and she became an integral part of the team. But she was a consultant they brought on board to work with them, and she ended up being a team member that we thought very, very highly of, right? Remember her? She was good.
Dr.
Then,
Uriarte.
okay, I'm again confused. I think if, I would not want to see us having a search firm with no experience in searches in educational institutions, so that you can use the word educational as a, as a sort of a boundary of, we don't want somebody that searched for a high-tech firm in Cambridge, you know what I mean? So that, I think we want to sort of narrow what the the environment that we're looking at. Again, I favor the language. I mean, I think most, when you're laying out qualifications, the clear qualifications and then the preferred is a good way to go. But it has to have a different structure in writing than what you have here, so that it actually, there's not a lot here about qualifications, so that you may want to rewrite that section so that it reflects that.
Well, so let me suggest something here. I think we might need a threshold statement in the qualifications section that says something to the effect of all firms and consultants that can demonstrate an ability to meet the scope of services requested in this, whatever we're calling this RFQ, will be considered. However, preference will be given to those that have done a search of this nature.
Yeah.
Just leave it at that.
Or something like says, search for leadership positions in educational, institutions, including superintendencies, blah, blah, so that you're laying abroad, but also who is it that we're looking for, and,
Mhm.
That makes sense to me.
Dean Coleman, you had something.
You know, and again, I want to articulate these ideas, not that I'm pushing them, that I've had the strong feeling in our conversations that we really don't want to get caught in a box of the industry and structuring in the search, looking like every other search puts us in that industry box.
what do you mean by that?
That I hear a description, the description that's here, I don't know how we're gonna have a pool that's substantially different than the pool we had before. I mean, we may have different candidates, we may choose a different person out of that pool, but I'm not sure we're gonna, of the 10 finalists we looked at, I can't see anything in this description or this process that, unless that's gonna be substantively different than the 10 we looked at before. We may get a better, the 10 finalists and we brought in 10 people for the, what they call the airport interview, out of which 3 came to the public interview. And I'm not sure what we're doing in this process that would drive a substantially different outcome, a different pool. Am I making sense on that?
What kind of person are you looking for? in this? What other people?
For example, if you take the Broad Institute, which has made quite a national name for saying we need to look beyond the traditional training of superintendents. And so they create their own training so that they're people who are coming from the military. Denver, Colorado area had a huge success hiring an Army general as their superintendent because he's run a diverse organization very well, very tightly, very clearly, that was mission driven, and they've had tremendous success with a very different background. I'm just putting that on the table as a thought to consider, not necessarily no one would think of me as a hardcore Broad Institute advocate, but that is something in the industry that we need to consider. So if you have a mission-driven, highly qualified individual who has a background running service-oriented organizations that has a history of diversifying the pool and creating equitable access for the population, is that what we're looking for? Or are we looking for an educator, superintendent, trained superintendent who can do that? How broad, how narrow? That's my question.
Maybe we should have had the discussion on the qualifications of the superintendent before, because that takes us in a very different direction.
I would, Mr.
Please.
Chair, I want to bridge a little bit of a gap here, because I understand, Dean Coleman, what you were bringing up. You're trying to keep all options open.
I want us to own the option we choose.
Right,
yeah.
only options we choose. And Dr. Uriarte, I see your concerns about nervousness about going off in a different direction. I just want to level set where we are right now, which is this is strictly an RFP, not for a candidate,
Right.
just for a firm that's going to help us talk to candidates. And I also, like Dean Coleman, like it to be as open as possible, quite frankly, not for the reasons that Dean Coleman is saying. I respect your viewpoint of let's have a range of candidates. You've always pushed the envelope on that. But also, I think if we want to get a really deeply experienced and successful superintendent, or a very, very strong number 2 who's really making a difference, there is going to be hesitancy in talking to the same old recruiting firms that are in there, because people are deeply concerned about their reputations and about word that they're considering. Even having conversations. And once you enter into that group of, and no disrespect to HYA who worked with us before, and I'm conscious that this is a public thing, but HYA, like a lot of these folks, have a list of 30 people that they talk to that they know are out looking for jobs. I suspect we're going to be trying to pry someone from a job who's doing a good job, because we want experience and we want success. And I would suspect that they may be willing to talk to someone who is a consultant who's slightly outside of the box versus the folks who are deeply embedded in the industry. you know, more like some of these
For
firms that you two,
self-protection,
for self-protection reasons, right? So I think, and that's why I go back to, I'd love to, you know, to me, it's interesting, a firm that may know Boston, as an example, and have brought leaders here, to talk with these folks about, so what's it really mean? Let's do a deep dive on why was Dr. Chain successful, what was he successful in, but what were his obstacles? What does it mean that we, as a group, continuously rated him lowest on community involvement? So, and have a consultant or a search firm that knows Boston and can talk through, so what is this school committee's priorities? What, and really be able, not just someone who parachutes in and does 10 of these across the country at a time. So I'm comfortable with the language, Mr. Chair, that you said, that it's preference, but that still leaves the search committee open to come to us and say, we're making a recommendation for the following reasons. And let us discuss it as a group at that time.
So what,
No, what I was gonna say, I'm okay with that, as long as we're talking about the qualifications of the
Search
of the
firm.
search firm.
All we're on
I may
right
have
now.
a different,
Yes.
something else to say
Agree.
about the other,
Yeah.
okay.
yeah, so I will take all these recommendations back, work on this specific section to loosen it up a little bit, but still, obviously, talk about the preference for the educational piece, but again, leaving it a little bit more broad so that
Yeah,
other firms or consultants can apply.
More welcoming.
Okay, great. I'd
So-
like to, yes,
Further comments or questions? So I think, you know, we're going to take a vote tonight because we do want to get this issued so that we can begin the process of accepting submissions from these different firms and consultants. And so I want to make sure that we're, the document that we're voting on is a document that we have in front of us, yet it also incorporates some of the items here that we've talked about in this conversation. I think Ms. Sullivan's probably tried to incorporate some of these edits as we speak. So I just want to make sure that we're getting all of them on record, and I'll start with the easiest one. The first one would be fixing Tanya Freeman Wisdom's title, or more accurately, the school where she's a headmaster. The second would be including the item that Ms. Robinson asked for inclusion, which is to ensure that we are sourcing not only international and nationally known candidates, but local candidates as well. And then the third item would be an amendment to section 4, on qualifications. I think I said 5 earlier, on that. To add a first sentence that says that something to the effect of all firms and consultants that can demonstrate an ability to meet the basic scope of services in this request shall be considered. And then the statement would go on, it is preferred that applicant firm or consultants, firms or consultants, have recent experience in conducting a successful search, and finish out that sentence. The second sentence in that paragraph would go away, which begins, if a firm does not have such experience. So I want to make sure that I haven't missed anything, and that everybody's comfortable with those edits. Dr. Quinn.
I would go back to page 3, under
Okay.
submissions guidelines. A summary of the firm's experience in conducting executive searches for superintendents of schools for comparably sized pre-K-12 school districts or equivalent organizations. So that if we're broadening the range, otherwise, that would limit it only to people who've done superintendents.
Dean Coleman, isn't that captured by number 2? A list of recent assignments, education and/or related fields, would that capture it?
Well, if I'm reading this as a search firm from the outside, without the or in the first one, the second one, I'm not going to the second one, because you've already wiped me out. Because I can't answer number 1. I don't have it, I can't answer it.
Well, if I can suggest, the section does not require an affirmative answer for each one of these questions. It only requires that the firm answer each of the questions. And so we're not stating that you must have experience that qualifies under number 1. You must just simply answer the question.
Respectfully, I think I've applied to a lot of jobs, because I can't keep them long enough. And so that's the type of thing I look for, to see what type of shot I get, and the jobs I don't apply for because of that.
And the lawyer in me tells me to talk around those types of questions.
That's right. So,
I see your point. Let's think about we don't want to dilute the idea that if a
Where-
firm does
what-
indeed,
what
we're on
page
page
are you-
3.
Page 3, section 2, number 1.
So we don't want to dilute the question, which is number 1, first and foremost for us, that we want to know what a firm's experience is in attracting candidates for superintendents in similar districts.
Yeah, or equivalent positions that have the complexity of running a urban school district.
Shall we add a second question so that we can separate these out for the ease of intake? That says, if you do not have this experience, or if you have not had recent experience in conducting executive searches for superintendents of schools, please provide equivalent experience in the educational setting.
Oh, okay, so like a 1B.
Can I suggest
Or related.
language? What I would say, in order to include both, summary of the firm's experience in conducting executive searches, including including superintendent of schools, et cetera, or highlighting superintendents of schools. Do you see what I mean?
With
Because
an emphasis on
well, I would
searches
say
for
highlighting,
superintendents of
you know what I
schools.
mean, so that you're
Yeah.
not, clearing out the others, but,
That may do it.
Yeah.
That's
Does that work?
That's a great idea.
I was like,
Okay.
just highlighting executive searches as superintendent.
Yep, so there's a comma after searches, and you add the word highlighting.
Yeah, if you don't
Superintendents
have
of
it, you
schools.
don't highlight it, but if
Yep.
you do, then you do.
All right. I think we're there.
Many years of job descriptions.
been around
All of
the
us have
barn.
either applied for
It's a
jobs
very-
or
the
responded to
academy is a
RFPs.
very moving, it's a moving experience.
So this would be item number 4 that we would be
Yeah.
correcting in the document that we have before us, which would be the comma after the word searches and inserting, highlighting.
Highlighting executive searches for superintendent.
Ms. Sullivan, do you have that? Okay, Ms. Oliver Davila, you have that in that works for you?
Mhm.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Well, if there's no further questions, I'll entertain a motion to approve the RFQ as presented with the amendments, the 4 amendments that we've discussed previously and have been read into the record.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Is there a second? Thank you, Dean Coleman. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Oliver Davila,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Jerry Robinson,
Yes.
Ms. Regina Robinson. Yes. Dr. Uriarte,
Yes,
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. Lecanto.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Well, thank you, Ms. Sullivan. We'll move on now to a review of the draft job description. Ms. Oliver Davila?
So in your packet, you'll find the previous desired characteristics for superintendent, which is the job description. We have not tweaked any of this. The search committee spent a little bit of time talking about this. We will spend the bulk of our meeting tonight covering this as well. And part of our process will be collecting the survey data, collecting themes, and also all of our community listening sessions. So I think the easiest way to do this is just thinking about some of the questions that we have around the experience of and qualifications of the next superintendent. So I was thinking if we could concentrate on talking about what are some of the non-negotiable experiences and qualifications do we feel like the next superintendent has to have? So for example, what we were talking about earlier, do we want to have someone who was a previous superintendent in more than one district? Someone who was a previous superintendent in an urban district? someone who's been an educator or someone who has organizational management experiences. And then on the flip side is what experiences and qualifications would be nice to have, but not necessarily required. And so starting out with that, and then I have some other questions as well. I can just say them now, and then let's just do free for all. The other questions are what experiences, what non-negotiable skills, knowledge, and disposition does the next superintendent have to possess? And again, what would be nice to have, but not required? And then I think lastly, as we have this conversation, is do we want to think about the specific context that we're in right now in terms of the next superintendent, what they would have to demonstrate that they can manage? So for example, we're in the process of build BPS. That's a specific moment in time. So do we want someone who's had that experience? So just putting that in the back of our minds. And then I just like to open up to your comments, which will, again, be part of the process with the search committee comments and the community comments, and then we'll come back on November 28th and also December 5th with the final of this.
Well, thank you, Ms. Oliver Davila, and I'll just note that, bless you, I believe you've already had a number of these, both meetings of the search committee as well as community discussions to date, where you've collected beginning discussions as well as comments on the job description. And I believe the survey is now live as well.
Yes.
And we have an email, which is superintendentsearch@bostonpublicschools.org. And we're receiving input from the public through all of those channels. As a reminder to folks that are here tonight, as well as folks that might be watching online or on TV, all of our search committee meetings are open meetings. The public is welcome to attend. There's public comment at each meeting as well, in addition to the community forums that will continue through early December. So we want your feedback, and we received, I believe, this at the last meeting, this same, we call it a draft job description, but what it was in reality, or what it is in reality, is the job description that exists for the current or most recent superintendent. And we look to build off of that. So this is the beginning of that process. And as Ms. Oliver Davila said, we have a few meetings here to go, where we'll have further opportunities to refine as a group the characteristics that are stated in this job description, as well as hear from the public on the job description as it's presently stated prior to posting. So with that, I'll open it up to members for questions or discussion. Dr. Uriarte.
I have one question. I think one of the understands in the second set, you talk about the Boston Compact as being a requirement. I am really concerned about raising that as a requirement. But overall, I think, in dealing with your first question about what are we looking for, I think this discussion takes me back to a superintendent, the process of the last superintendent, without a doubt, and what were some of the issues that were difficult, and when we learned from that experience moving forward. I don't want to get into an analysis of what happened and how it happened, but there's an important takeaway for me, and that is the complexity of the job, not only in educational terms, but also in political terms, and what kind of maturity and experience, and I don't mean maturity in terms of age, but maturity in terms of, hands-on experience to really be able to be successful at a job like this in Boston. Boston, sometimes the politics, it overtakes the content, and so we need somebody that can handle that and that can deal with that and be strong in that as an educational advocate in that context. But also we need somebody that knows what they're doing in in terms of the educational, the hands-on educational piece of it. It's not just the politics of it. One of the thoughts that I have on this, and I'm, again, I say this with some concern, with some, I don't know what the word is, but, after training a lot of young.
Trepidation.
Huh?
Trepidation.
Trepidation, but we don't need somebody that's learning. We need somebody that knows. And and I think, we have, all of us, I mean, a lot of us are educators. You want to open the door to, people that are moving up, but this is a place that is hard. This is a place that is hard. And if we want to be successful, we need somebody that can handle the harshness and the hardness and the processes that need to be put in place so that they're successful. I don't think we need to be liberal about this. We need to be realistic, looking at what we've seen, all of us, and how do we move forward from that, and never forgetting that there's 57,000 kids that are looking at us, waiting for us to hire somebody that can guide them, that can be good at that. So that is my concern. The importance that it be somebody that knows and that has the experience and the capacity to do that. Once you get that, we need then somebody that has experience in a lot of these areas, that understands issues related to achievement gaps, that we don't have to convince them about why bilingual education is important or why special ed is important. You know what I mean? That it's somebody that gets it from the moment that they're walking the door, at least on those three areas: issues related to achievement gaps, language issues, and special education. We don't want somebody that's learning in that. That's my take.
I think that's very helpful, if I can comment on that as well, because I think, we took that commentary that we heard from you last time, or I shouldn't say we, but the search committee took that commentary that we heard from you last time and incorporated that in the RFQ. And so I think, just some simple, bold statements around, the opportunity and achievement gap issues that face our district, the special needs issues that face our district, English language learners. Those are core. That's the essence and the heart of our district. And so if we're looking for a leader that is going to solve those problems, we need to see it, or it would be helpful to see proven strategies and a track record in doing so. Thank you.
Now,
Ms. Robinson, you had something.
I said my comments follow along with Dr. Uriarte in looking at that piece. That's the third bullet from the bottom on the section understanding. I think it's all in there, but it almost needs to be unpacked and put higher up. The section that says develop effective and efficient partnerships with the many community organizations, because political officials and others, they're all buried in there. But, as Dr. Uriarte said, Boston is a hard place. And those things are more critical than most people might believe, seeing it sort of hidden in here. And I think we need to bring some of those critical issues about being in Boston to the top.
At least the third bullet. At least the third.
Politics is a blood sport in Boston.
Right.
Mr. O'Neill.
I echo Dr. Uriarte's comment, and I like that distinction about we don't want someone who's learning. We want someone who's proven. I had a conversation with a highly successful superintendent of a very large district recently, and he said to me, look, he said, you folks need a really good superintendent. He wasn't interested himself, but he said, how can I help you? Because he said, nationally, there's Boston, New York, Chicago, there's New York, Chicago, LA, Houston, Dallas, and Miami. Those are pretty much the largest urban districts. And so beyond that, the two districts that matter the most that everyone focuses in on is Boston and Washington, D.C. He said Washington, D.C. because the eyes of the federal government are on you, and Boston because you were the first, and you have all that higher ed around you and the partnerships, and if you can't make it work in Boston, you can't make it work anywhere. And this is a special place. And I think we can be, this time, we can shoot high and really focus in on that. And also, to echo what several of you have been saying, we are also a dependent school district. We are not independent. Our funding comes from the city. Our employees are city employees. Our buildings we work with the city on. And I think acknowledging that fact and specifically calling out as a track record of not just dealing with the mayor, because the superintendent does report to us, but dealing with the mayor, dealing with the city council, dealing with our House and Senate representatives at the state level, because we do have to fight for Boston to be different. We do have to fight for Boston to get different funding. And having the ability to deal with electeds across the board, in addition to the work with everyone that's listed here. Just saying public officials in a list of stuff is not strong enough for me, because there are not many dependent districts like us, and I think that's a unique skill set.
So maybe we should say that. Boston is a dependent district, and this is what it means,
And then it's important, and here's the co-chair right now, I think it's important to be able to say, dealing with, you know, the elected officials both at the city and state level, may be the way to phrase it. That's an important skill set, because it impacts our funding, it impacts our interaction with a number of different agencies that serve our students together, et cetera, and that is an important skill set.
Reggie?
So I wonder if some language could be, as I'm hearing my fellow members, having a proven track record, and then outlining what the proven track record, almost some sub-points, whether it's, you know, grade configurations, school closures, complex political environment, both at local and state levels. So if there are some specific sub-points, because then it gives the community and it gives the search committee language to ask specific questions. So it will allow the candidate to answer specifically because the specific question is asked, versus asking a broad question. How have you handled a political environment? We can be more specific in saying, how have you handled complexities in a political environment on the local level? How have you been a problem solver with state leaders in the educational setting? So you're asking the specific question because it's been specifically outlined. So if you start with proven track record and then you have some of the specific components that are related to Boston, as you just stated earlier, for us to think about the context that we're in right now, we're in Bill BPS. And if you've been reading the book that we received last week,
Yes.
there is specific language of how school closures impacted Chicago that look very similar to the direction should we choose to move towards about urban environments and how school closures impact the community. So there's even specific language there that, you know, for folks who are reading that book, I feel like it's kind of the current Boston Reading Club right now, because it is the current environment that we're in, but it can give the community language for the candidate. So if we first speak to proven track record, then that lays out the directive that we're seeking for a candidate. So that's just one of my suggestions.
Dean Robinson, may I make just one slight addendum to that?
Sure.
If you're suggesting a list of proven track record, and I cringed when you said on school closings.
No.
And alternatives to school closings?
Alternative solutions.
Alternative solutions.
Alternative solutions.
Developing and implementing alternative
Right.
solutions.
At the risk of wordsmithing on a document that still has a long way to go, maybe even just thinking something to the effect of how to effectively reorganize a district to best utilize resources, you know, something along those lines. And I think, you know, to that point, you know, I think that the commentary and the conversation here is great, because this is something that I think a lot of us have had on our minds since July, and thinking about how we're going to articulate this and move our way forward. But having said that, we have a search committee, of course, of a number of able-bodied individuals that we've selected for the purpose of, you know, helping to shepherd all of this through. And so I think, you know, my view tonight is, you know, this is our first opportunity as a body to publicly give feedback to that search committee to then take and further, you know, push and pull with this statement of desired characteristics and bring back to us another document at the next meeting that we can further digest and continue to refine and incorporate and so on and so forth. Before Dr. Uriarte, we go to you for further comment. I know Dean Coleman's got some comments as well. And thank you, Dean Robinson. I do want to formally recognize and introduce Dr. Keith Motley, who's joined us, our co-chair for the Superintendent Search Committee. And Dr. Motley, if you wouldn't mind joining us, if you have additional comments or would like to be able to be a part of this conversation, you are a co-chair along with Ms. Oliver Davila, and we'd appreciate your voice being lent to this conversation.
Well, I don't have comments yet. I want to catch up to you, but you want me to sit here?
Please, please do, sir.
Okay, I'll sit here.
They like to get your smiling face on camera, Dr. Motley.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you again, and we appreciate your service here.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you.
Dr. Uriarte.
Okay. I'm assuming that there's gonna be a document or a description that accompanies this set of criteria. Maybe in that couple of paragraphs, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs, you can explain the moment in which we find ourselves. You know, the need to, you know, all the different issues that we've just raised here, so that people that are reading this can sort of relate. And this is what we're dealing with right now. This in many ways seems like a job description for a very peaceful. And that's not who we are right now. And I think we need to acknowledge that, you know, we're in transition. There are a lot of things on the table that this person will have to.
Still want to attract a candidate, you know.
Well, but you don't want them to sink 3 months into the, you know what I mean? But I think that's
to
not,
your-
if, you know, for example, I have an old boss here, but, you know, you.
Old is that?
No, as in many years of bossness of mine. But, you know, if you were in a transition, a department in transition, a new department, a new set of challenges, you would explain that so that people could respond to that in their, you know, in their applications.
And in all seriousness, and to your point, you know, the items that you raised earlier with respect to, you know, what are the core focal points for our district, you know, those things need to be there. And to talk a little bit about, you know, what are the current issues that are facing us? And, you know, you think about how long an average superintendent stays, somewhere between, you know, maybe 3 and 10 years nowadays.
The average is
I'm
2.
being very broad
The
in that
average is 2.
regard.
No, it's fine.
But nevertheless, I'm being very broad. All the issues that are before us are the issues that are going to continue to be before us over that next decade. And so I think it makes sense for us to, you know, give someone a sense of, you know, what it is that we really need them to be coming in here and doing. So I
Can I
think that's
make a
important
suggestion
points. Yes,
about
please.
this point is, I mean, that's in the RFP. I mean, it's expanding what you're saying. It is talking about where we are now, the positives, and then it also talks about all the challenges before us. I don't
No,
think,
but we're talking about the job
Right.
description, right?
Right.
right, but I'm saying to take it out of the RFP document
Yeah,
as the background. I mean, it should match anyway. I mean, we can expand it, but it does talk about all the things that you're talking about, build BPS. It mentions opportunity achievement gap,
exactly.
working with English language learners, so I don't think we need to go crazy.
Doesn't need to be, you know, like, you know, a negative picture, but
No, it
it
says
needs to
it
show
has
complexity, is
both,
what it
yeah.
needs to show.
It has both of those pieces on there.
I think that's an excellent point.
Huh?
Dean Coleman.
Just a couple thoughts to put on the table. One is, to put it in some context, we're really working to get a set of 10 people that will be coming to the airport interview, that will provide the committee a range of choices, that will bring alive the possible choices for Boston, out of which they'll pick 3 to come to meet us publicly, right? And so I would suggest or advocate that we have a call that sets up some diversity in that 10, rather than a homogeneous replication of each other, and just, as you say, which flavor of vanilla. And so I think that's gonna be part of how we structure the call and what we should be open to. So I wanna give an explicit example of one of the things I think we're challenged by is we, in our language, tend to integrate skills in teaching and learning with skills with management.
Exactly.
And finding that knight or knightess who has all those qualities may be a stretch. And so one of the things I think we may want to consider is if we get someone who's strong in teaching and learning, how do we think about the structure of the organization that we as a board may articulate very early on to support that, and vice versa. Maybe we, and given our theories of Boston that I've heard for 10 years, we may be looking at someone who's stronger in managerial skills and external skills, and then we would immediately think about how to strengthen teaching and learning. As Chancellor Motley knows, many people within the higher ed, we hire a chancellor, a president, and then a provost. We built that, we baked that distinction into our bread, that we have a leader who's external and a leader who's internal, and we bake it into bread. And we may be a district in this complex dependent organization we have that may want to start with that as a thought. Things to think of.
For thought. Mr. O'Neill.
Don't we somewhat do that by having a superintendent and then having a chief academic officer and a head of operations, so to speak?
We have a head of operations, but we don't the chief academic officer is not built into the system. And in fact, I think one of the things that we saw recently is the diffusion, the taking up of teaching and learning, and we hold the superintendent maybe more accountable to teaching and learning and not separating that. I don't think we've had that separated in the past 4 or 5 years.
I agree. I think Dr. Chang background was more on the academic side, and I think we as a committee tended to focus more on the academic side as well. And yet where he struggled, particularly in the community with the city and other parts, was more on the operational side. And so I think that's an important distinction that you're teasing out a little bit, because we want someone who gets the operational aspects. The trains have to run on time, as they say, before you can start to make academic improvement. Or in the higher ed model, you commit that you know how to run an urban district, but you're also bringing in a strong academic officer to run the academic side.
Or
So-
technical history where you've had a technical leader that you've supervised well in the technical end while you've managed the operational end. Again, which may not mean you've been a superintendent before, right? So I'm just putting, driving to the idea that the search committee should look broadly and hear our conversations so they can choose within. And if we write a description that would allow someone who says, oh, I had this to bring to it, they'll look at it. They may not, it'll be a risk, they'll look at it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was on me. I just wanted to make sure I didn't lose my thought, since I am getting older, around this. So we understand that the persons that we're going to be dealing with are going to be sort of incomplete, but they're not going to be incompetent. And what I mean by that is that this notion of leadership that you're talking about, in focusing on the one dimension, which might be the operations and all these other things, leaders should have all of those kinds of things, including the academic piece, but that may not be what makes them, that may be their good, but not their excellent. And so we need to make sure that we're clear organizationally around this notion of what you describe provost, and that's the academic leader of a university. Well, we need to make sure that if this is what we're doing in Boston with this academic leadership, that's noted, it's known, that it's driven, and then it's okay for this superintendent to have that as a quality, but also to focus on moving this system forward. Because if you get tied up trying to do everything, you won't be able to do much, particularly when the other dimensions get in, politics, this and that and the other, that you have to be good at as a leader. So, and the other thing about this is our opportunity to sort of listen, learn, and put this thing together. My colleague talked about the fact that lots of it is in one document or another. We're finding those things, we're pulling them together, and this is really it's a draft that sort of is your old drafts, and now we'll be adding new things to it. All that we've heard, all the calls that we've gotten, all the meetings we've had, haven't even been entered into. This is our second official meeting tonight, and so it's great to walk in. I was standing out there watching you all on television because they said there was nobody else was in here. And then they finally said, oh, you're supposed to be in there. So now here I am. But I did hear you talking about all this earlier, and these kinds of things should be considered as we sort of do it, but we don't need to reinvent some of it when it's in one or the other, and we'll pull that together. I think our committee is in the process of doing lots of that.
Thank you, Dr. Motley. Dr. Uriarte.
I wanted to push back a little bit on this notion that it's a choice between, administrator and an academic. And even if we look around, higher ed institutions, it's not necessarily the only model. Look at BACO, look at REEF. These are people that have been able to combine both in a very strong way and be leaders in a very strong way. So, I mean, I don't see that as I think that's a false dichotomy to say that you cannot find, that you cannot find the same person, or that, not necessarily when you have that structure of inside and outside, that is the most successful. So again, what I'm saying is keep your, your options open, because even around here in Boston, we have very, very different ways of dealing with that question.
I agree we should keep our option open, and that's what I'm articulating. We should keep it open.
Yeah.
Right.
Not fix it into one. We're in agreement. I'm not saying that we have to split it, but I want us to be open to that conversation. That's exactly, we're in agreement.
What is important is once you find a candidate, is to really be honest about what you have, and then say, okay, well, this is a person that, the strengths of this person is in the area of instruction, or the strength of this person is in the area of operations, and then build around them the kind of support that will make them, that would make them successful. I think that's, what Dr. Motley was referring to. Nobody comes with all the pieces, already inserted. Sometimes you need a team. You usually talk about a team, but I don't want us to say, oh, but we need this, and then we need, I think there are a lot of people, that combine both in a very productive way and in a very successful way.
Ms. Oliver Davila.
Thank you for all your comments. I would also say that this is why it's important for our community to fill out the survey, come to the community listening session. So I love all of you guys, but at the end of the day, it's going to be what the driver will be the community and what the community. So we have surveys that have come back from BTU, and I wish I could remember the top three. Maybe you'll remember the top three items that teachers asked for. I don't remember, but anyway.
One of them was
a local, I think.
And teaching experience, classroom experience, a local perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the third.
I can't remember, but
They also were dealing with size of the, they wanted to have someone with experience and competencies, but also the size of the district that they're coming from. Just because you happen to be a superintendent doesn't mean that you're right for this opportunity. So they wanted us to be aware that size and scope of your work should matter as well, should play into that.
I agree, huh?
So I also want to just acknowledge we have a couple of members from our search committee.
Thank you.
Carlos Brown is here. He's a parent of, he has kids in the Guild Elementary School. Carolyn Kane is here. I want to thank her because she did a lot of work on the RFP, so thank you very much. And Craig Martin, one of our headmasters from the Perkins Elementary School is here too. And did I miss anyone else? They're here for our search committee, so thank you. So thank you for everyone's comments. This will be a moving target, and we will continue to work on it. We'll come back with another draft, and then another draft on November 28th, and then hopefully the final on December 5th, so that we can get this out so we can get the best candidates to apply in December. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Oliver Davila. Thank you as well, Dr. Motley, for being here with us this evening. I know you have a meeting that begins promptly at 7 in this meeting space with the rest of the search committee, who I suspect is en route. We do want to continue to hear from members of the public, as Ms. Oliver Davila noted, and we'll have an opportunity to do that in just a moment with public comment, as well as through, once again, all of the channels that you've noted. The survey, which you can find at bostonpublicschools.org/ is it superintendent search? Yes. And you can submit your comments online via email at superintendentsearch@bostonpublicschools.org, as well as when you're on the website, view the calendar of events that are coming up with respect to all the different search committee meetings that are upcoming, as well as community forums that will continue through mid-December. We'll have a number that are hosted by partner organizations coming up, and I probably won't recall all of them, but I know BSAC is one.
Yep, I can tell you.
You want to go through them, that'd be great.
On Monday, November 19th, Monday, November 19th from 6 to 8 p.m., Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center is hosting at the Josiah Quincy Elementary School. On Tuesday, November 20th, from 4:30 to 6:30 here at the bowling, the Boston Student Advisory Council with other youth programs are hosting. Also on November 27th, we are meeting with the Citywide Parent Council. On Thursday, December 6th, from 6 to 8, will be hosted by the Boston Branch Double ACP and other organizations at 330 MLK Boulevard in Roxbury. And Monday, December 10th, will be in Spanish in East Boston from 6 to 8 p.m. at the East Boston Social Center, and that will be hosted by the Greater Boston Latino Network and Amplify and other organizations. And then we will also have another, I don't have a date, for school leaders that they have requested one.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver Davila. And as a further reminder for folks that are familiar with this process, we receive our public comment in 2 steps through this process. This is the first phase where we'll receive public comment on the job descriptions and the RFP for the search firm. Once we do get the finalists, that will become final candidates, for superintendent. That will be the second phase of our public search process. And so we'll have further opportunities at that time for interview panels and meetings here, public interviews with the school committee. So a lot coming up, a lot of opportunities for people to provide their input. And I did want to recognize one other search committee member that joined us since we read off the names, and I think he stepped outside the room again, but our student representative, Mr. Elvis Rodriguez from the Snowden International School, who's doing a great job thus far. We appreciate him being part of this process. So with that, we will move on. We'll hear a little bit more about this at the November 28th meeting, and we'll move on now to public comment. Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Locanto. The public comment period is an opportunity for parents, students, and other concerned parties to make brief presentations to the school committee on pertinent school issues. Questions on specific school matters are not answered at this time, but are referred to the superintendent for a later response. Questions on specific policy matters are not answered at this time, but may be the subject of later discussion by the committee. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak, and I'll remind you when you have 1 minute remaining and then 30 seconds. Those who require interpretation services will receive an additional 2 minutes. Speakers may not reassign their time to others. Written testimony is appreciated and encouraged. Please state your name and affiliation before you begin. TV cameras will only record speakers who face the committee. We'll begin this evening with Ruby Reyes, and she'll be followed by Edith Brasil and Mary Battenfeld.
Good evening, Ms. Reyes, Ms. Bazile.
My name is Ruby Reyes. I'm the director of the Boston Education Justice Alliance. As community organizations concerned about the well-being of students, schools, and the future of our city, we come to you with concerns about recently announced plans for Phase 2 of Build BPS, including plans to close 3 district schools. This plan directly impacts the search for a new superintendent. Build is a long-term and comprehensive plan. Build BPS to date is neither long-term nor comprehensive. It lacks critical aspects that will allow students, families, educators, and communities to understand the direction and vision of our schools. This plan does not draw quality candidates for superintendents because the plan lacks the following: a 10-year timetable for facility maintenance, relocation, construction, and closure of schools, an analysis to determine if plans are equitable by race, socioeconomic status, neighborhood, disability, and linguistic groups, an impact analysis to understand the effects on current and future students, families, and neighborhoods in the city, a financial report including estimated costs for rebuilds, relocation, maintenance, program expansion, and swing space, an educational plan regarding programs, grade reconfigurations, extended learning time, student assignments. In short, the plan does little to answer the question, what are the long-term plans for schools of our children and the children across our city? And how will Phase 2 recommendations of the plan affect current students and communities, as well as the search for a new superintendent?
Hello, school committee members. My
Good
name
evening.
is Edith Bazile, and continuing with our joint collaborative statement, we believe that as a city of many neighborhoods, Boston must make long-term decisions that address the city as a whole and in a comprehensive way. This is especially critical regarding our schools, where decisions made regarding one school or neighborhood have great potential and impact on other students, schools, and neighborhoods. For this reason, plans for any one area of the city must be part of the documents provided to the stakeholders in each community. In light of the years of distrust in our schools, it is especially important that meaningful stakeholder involvement be at the core of any plan. To date, the Build BPS plan does not address our concerns. We believe that Build BPS is a plan for the future that unfortunately goes back to the past. It ignores reports about increased segregation and inequity among our schools, which is especially painful as we approach the 65th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education decision, as well as the 45th anniversary of the Morgan versus Hennigan decision. It punishes schools with highly vulnerable student population. It increases divisions between schools, asking them to compete against each other for new builds and renovated buildings. And it does nothing to address the burning issues of variable quality across our district. And importantly, the plan does active harm to the 1,091 students of the McCormick, the Urban Science Academy, and the West Roxbury High School, all slated for closure over the next year and a half. It is for these reasons, that we, the signatory organizations, request a moratorium on school closures and major facilities decisions until the full 10-year facilities and educational plan with the missing information, as articulated by my colleague and partner, requested above, is released. Exempted from the moratorium, however, is a request that the construction of new school buildings already approved for existing schools. In addition, we request that there be no divestment of school properties or lands or breaking up of schools should a school community need to move for safety reasons. Finally,
20 seconds.
we reiterate our request for authentic community engagement and decisions about the future of our city schools and leadership. My organization is Black Educators Alliance of Massachusetts. I didn't note that earlier. The 11 organizations, community organizations that are signatories of this statement include Black Educators Alliance of Massachusetts, of which I am the president, the Boston branch of the NAACP, the Boston Education Justice Alliance, Boston Network for Black Student Achievement, Citizens for Public Schools, Harbor Point Task Force, Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health, SURGE, Showing Up for Racial Justice Boston, Start Smart BPS, Quest, Quality Education for Every Student, and Union of Minority Neighborhoods. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mary Battenfeld, and she'll be followed by Peggy Wiesenberg.
Good evening. The time is always right to do what's right, said Dr. Martin Luther King in a 1964 speech entitled The Future of Integration. I begin with this quote both because it was on the wall of the Condon School framing last night's Build BPS meeting, and because I believe that above all else, the next Boston Public School superintendent should possess the experience and moral clarity to see what our most vulnerable children need and the courage to do what's right for them. The time is always right to do what's right. As the letter outlining concerns about BPS just read and signed by 11 groups, including Quest. I forgot to identify myself. I'm Mary Battenfeld, parent currently at Boston Arts Academy and member of Quest. But as that letter says, doing what's right means ensuring that plans for our schools and our students are, quote, equitable by race, socioeconomic status, neighborhood disability, and linguistic groups. Doing what's right means authentic community engagement. It means opening your minds to alternatives to school closures and your ears to the nearly 1,100 students of the McCormick Urban Science Academy and West Roxbury High School whose anguished voices these past weeks have been pleading with you to keep their schools open and their lives and communities whole. The new superintendent, as several of you have said, should also understand Boston. Boston, not just politically, but historically, educationally, as a city where the separate and unequal system that spawned Morgan v. Hennigan is, as the Barry Report suggests, appears to be raising its ugly head again. Boston as a place where the community has little to no hope, as a student from one of the schools stated for closure put it, that you will listen to what I have to say. I believe that can change. You can show those students that their voices and lives matter, beginning by declaring a moratorium on school closures. You can then move on to select a superintendent who does not come hobbled by the distrust of the community, have that superintendent come in with a fresh start and implement a Build BPS that really is a future our children deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Battenfeld. Our next speaker is Peggy Wiesenberg, and she'll be followed by John Mudd.
Good evening. I'm here testifying about the superintendent's search, both as the parent of 3 Boston Public School graduates and as an attorney who advised state government officials on procurement of services and handled procurement appeals, and as a taxpayer. I have 2 concerns. One, with the desired characteristics, and the other is with the request for qualifications for the executive firm. Like Dr. Uriarte, I am concerned about specifying that one of the key abilities of the candidate is to collaborate with the other Boston schools for the benefit of all children within the city, including continuing the ongoing engagement with charter and parochial schools through the Boston Compact. Nowhere in this job description does it say to be a champion of the district who will zealously advocate for Boston public schools, students, staff in the city, state, and national arenas. I would strike that bullet about the compact and substitute the language I just suggested. In terms of the qualifications for the firm, I am very concerned that it says on page 2, the cost of this superintendent search, including the services of the search consultant, will be privately funded through foundation support. As such, this request is not being issued under Mass General Laws, Chapter 30B, that governs public procurement. As a taxpayer, I find this extremely troubling. You need to disclose the amount of money that a national search would cost and what private foundation or foundations support is being offered. And further, I would suggest that you reject private money and use our tax dollars, take it out of our school department budget, or get additional funds from the mayor's discretionary funds to pay for this search. We need an above-board process, and we cannot afford to undermine the next superintendent's ability to build trust with us, the parents, the students, the teachers, the community stakeholders. Denver is paying $30,000 and travel fees to Hazard and Young for its superintendent search.
20 seconds.
In searching for a superintendent, Clark County School Board, which is Las Vegas, first required that contributions offered by their Chamber of Commerce and a foundation, the Rogers Foundation, and other donors be made public and transparent, and then they shifted to reject financial help and to use their budget to pay for the search. They consulted with the executive director of the Council for Great City Schools, on which Mr. O'Neill sits, who cautioned that the burden of paying for a superintendent search should be the responsibility of the district and its trustees, not third parties. Even amid budget cuts, he cautioned that even though donors will say there are no strings attached, his experience has led him to conclude there are always strings attached. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wiesenberg. Our final speaker is Mr. John Mudd.
Good evening. I just want to make a couple of quick comments about the search process. First, I'm really happy that the search committee and the school committee listed challenges for that the school system will face. I think we need to be open about our challenges, we need to own them, and we need to be honest with the people who we are dealing with that this is what is necessary for this district. My one caveat on the contract or the request for qualifications is the timetable. I mean, you're giving 2 weeks, including Thanksgiving, to get results back. And I would just hope that the search committee would be in a position to say, we're not satisfied with, what we're getting in this time frame, just the way I think someone suggested we should be willing to say that about the pool of candidates when they come. So I just would hope that the search committee would be open to that. Secondly, by analogy, I think it's very, very important that the job description also be as specific as we are in the request for qualifications. We need, again, to be searching for people who can deal with the real problems that are facing this school system. The existing or past job description is very aspirational. It talks about, people having understanding or being committed. We need to have, as Dean Robinson said, people who have a track record. You know, and we need to specify that we want to see what the achievement has been, what the success has been, and what the track record has been. And I hope the search committee will follow through on that. Finally, I've said this before, on community consultations, I am a deep believer in going to the community with the questions we want their advice about, not just to say, what do you want? And if the issue is, or one of the key issues is this management versus educator question, let's phrase that and let's have a discussion as a community and what the strengths and weaknesses are. I mean, I personally believe we have serious educational issues facing the district, and I believe that anybody worth his salt is a team builder, and that should be a critical element of any qualifications of someone. So I would hope that you could engage the community in a real discussion on this one, and that we will then benefit from what we learn. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Mudd. Mr. LaConto, that concludes our speakers for public comment.
Well, thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Any new business from our fellow committee members?
Mr. Chair, may I just ask,
Mr. O'Neill.
this sheet that was just passed out, Community Partners for New Superintendent, where did that specifically come from?
I believe that was something that was submitted by Mr. Mudd.
It was.
Was that from you, Mr. Mudd?
Yeah, that's something that Community Partners for a New Superintendent put together years ago as their suggested.
Thank you, sir.
And
Are
it
you
was
familiar-
handed out to all of the search committee. It's in our documents also
Thank you.
as another.
It might be lost on me, but who are the community partners?
There was a group that Reverend Gruber and others in the parent, church, community organization world put together to help in the search for superintendents in years past.
That
Part of, like,
particularly
the
was the
fund.
search that, the search that ultimately ended with Dr. Johnson.
Yes, with part of the
Understood.
Boston Parent Organizing Network.
Got it. Okay.
They seem to be relevant.
Well, absolutely. That's why I was,
Unchanged.
this is absolutely relevant to right now, so.
The more things
You may wa-
change, right?
You may want to
No,
borrow language
We
from
handed it out to
that.
the search committee for that reason, because we thought it was relevant. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Right.
That was eons ago, so I forgot all about it, but, yep.
Well, thank you to everyone who's come out this evening, and I want to express a note of thanks once again to my fellow members for making time for an additional meeting tonight. This keeps us on track. Once again, this is an aggressive search. This is an effort to try to get all the necessary pieces in place so that we can get a job description posted before the end of the year and get the best candidates in front of us. And so I thank you once again for being partners in that effort. This concludes our business for this evening, and our next school committee meeting will be the Wednesday after next, November 28th at 6 p.m. I hope everyone has a happy Thanksgiving. If there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Dean Robinson. There's a second from Dr. Uriarte. Looks like unanimous consent. Good night.